Have you ever felt overwhelmed staring at a blank page trying to write a research proposal? You're not alone. Whether it's for a PhD application, a grant proposal, or a research project, writing a research proposal can feel like climbing Mount Everest. But what if I told you that there's a systematic approach to make writing a research proposal manageable? Today, I'm going to show you how to transform your ideas into a clear, convincing proposal that stands out. We'll break down the essential components, from crafting a strong problem statement to outlining your methodology. And I'll share proven strategies that helped countless researchers succeed. Before we get started, quick introduction. If you don't know me yet, hi, I'm Aynur. I'm a third-year PhD student in chemical engineering at Imperial College London, and I made it my mission to teach you every secret I know in academia, video by video, through all my social media channels. So without further ado, let's dive right into the video. First, we want to understand the key components of a research proposal. What does a research proposal consist of? Typically, a research proposal consists of approximately 8 sections. You have your title, your abstract, a little background/literature review about the research. Then you move on to your research question. What are you going to work on? What methodology are you going to use? Then also the significance of your research, the timeline, the funding, how are you planning to fund the project, and your references, and that's basically it. Now, before you start drafting your research proposal, it is important to read some proposals in your research area. So you know how science is like very diverse. There are lots of topics to do research about, and depending on what area you do your research proposals might differ a little bit. You know, the emphasis, the important points might shift a bit. In some areas, things like grants and money might be more important, whereas in other areas methodology is more important, and in other areas the timeline is more important. And you basically just want to get a feeling for how a research proposal is written, so what your research proposal should look like in the end. From this, like from reading these examples, you can already create your own outline, have a basic structure of your research proposal, and this is going to be your starting point. Now that your outline is ready, before you start filling in the gaps and writing, you need to understand, why are you even writing this research proposal? What is the purpose of it? If this is, for example, for a grant application, then the purpose is to receive the project grant, right? To receive the money to do that research. Now you have to think about what makes your research worth to spend so much money on. Why would people pay you to do that project? So you have to really clearly highlight the significance of it. You have to give them the security that you're that this idea is well thought through, that you can manage to do that research project. So basically, a research proposal is, hey, I have this research idea and I have developed this idea and I know exactly how to get from A to B. I have this timeline, this budget, and these methods, and with that we're going to get to the goal. So you basically show that you're ready to do the research, and this is the entire purpose of that research proposal. I am ready to get this research project done, and now you have to convince anyone who reads that research proposal that you're really ready to get that research done. In order to convince people that your research is worth pursuing, you need a strong problem statement. That's what it's called. So you're going to describe the research problem that we have, the research gap, and then you're going to describe why it has such high significance, that there is such big need to invest many years on it and do research on it, right? And while answering these why and what questions, you have to make sure that your research is grounded, backed up by literature, that you identified a research gap, and also a specific need, a purpose for your research. That's the problem statement. Once that is done, you're going to move on to the next step. We're now moving to the purpose statement, or aka methodology of your work. So in this section, you're going to answer following questions. Who or what is your target population or setting? When and where will your study take place? Why is the work needed? So in this section, we're going more into the detail. While in the problem statement that you did in the beginning, you just explained very briefly where the research gap lies, and you did a little bit of literature review in this. Now you're going more into detail on how you're going to pursue this research, how you're going to fill the gap, with what methodology. So once we're done with our problem statement, we're now going to move on to the methodology. And attention, methodology does not mean methods. We're going to do the methods later. Now, methodology. Methodology means your academic grounding, the theoretical framework that you're using, and why your approach fits. Methods are more like data sampling, analysis techniques, and practical steps to get your research done, okay? So in the methodology, you're now going to present your approach in theory, like your theoretical approach on how you're going to approach this research problem, right? Okay, so for example, I'm working on CFD, so my methodology would be in computational fluid dynamics, which algorithms, with which methods I'm using to conduct my research, like the theoretic background of it. But I'm not going to explain in my methodology section how how I'm collecting the data, how I'm evaluating the data, how I'm plotting it, and all these things that just does not belong into it. So I'm explaining this theory behind my setup, and this is methodology. Once you've done that, you're then going to move on to the methods, and this is going to be things like data sampling and analysis techniques. You know, when you work in the lab, what kind of tools do you use to get your results? These are your methods. So in your methods, you can explain how you sample data, like where do you sample data, what data do you collect, how do you get to your data. You will explain the tools and instruments that you use, the software, the lab techniques, the measuring instruments that you have. If you have any fieldwork plans, you'll explain the fieldwork plans in your method section. In terms of data analysis, you can explain what kind of code you'll use, whether you'll use any code at all, how will you do your data analysis. And finally, and this also belongs to the method section, is the skills that you have. What kind of skills do you have to be able to do the research, okay? So I think very roughly you can compare methodology in terms of the theory behind the work that you do, and the methods is the practical steps to get the work done. So in terms of theory, it would be why am I using CFD, computational fluid mechanics, to solve this problem? And then practical step would be how I'm actually using CFD, computational fluid mechanics, to solve the problem. What software do I use? What code do I use? How do I collect data from that? You know, these kind of things. All right, so now we have an introduction, a little literature review. We've stated the problem, we've stated our methodology and our method, and now we're going to move to the planning. And in the planning, we're going to state timeline and resources, and this is very, very important. Depending on what you apply to, whether if it's a PhD thesis, you're going to create a Gantt diagram with multiple years, and there you're going to break down the tasks. If it's for example, I just wrote a grant proposal that was for a 6-month project. So I basically just created a time plan for 6 months, and in every month I created goals that I wanted to achieve. And yeah, that's what we're going to do, in a very good overview. And this is important, really do this properly. You can also use AI that will help you with that, just to give it a bit of better structure at all. ChatGPT really does a great job with this. So you basically just start your starting point and your end goal, and then you give your own inputs, and with the help of ChatGPT turns out quite great. That was my experience with it. So time plan, very important, and don't be too insecure about it. I think everyone knows that time plans change all the time. This is more to show that you've thought things through from start to end, and that you know what's going to happen. And also that's what one of my reviewers told me in one of my assessments during my PhD. He said it's also good to include in your time plan kind of forks, plan B, plan C, that you say, okay, to identify critical areas in your time plan. He basically asked me, once I presented my Gantt diagram, he was okay, Aynur, which time, which thing here is critical? You know, if this does not work, that you then basically say, okay, the rest is also kind of trash because we need this to work. And then he said, okay, and in this critical step, if that's not going to work, what are you going to do then, right? So this also shows that you've thought things through. If you identify these critical points in your time plan, highlight them, and then also provide plan B and plan C options of what you're going to do if things don't go that way. So you basically with that appreciate that things can go wrong, and that you also know how to handle it if things don't work out like planned. The next step is funding. Now, obviously it depends. If you're applying for a grant proposal, then obviously you expect the funding to come from the grant that you're applying to. If this is a PhD application or something else, then it's important to also state how are you going to fund that project. Now, depending on where you apply, this might not be that important. In the UK, for example, it is important, because just because you apply for a PhD does not mean that your PhD is going to be funded. So you can either say that you have applied for scholarships and then you can name them, or you can say it's going to be self-funded, or you can say it's going to be industry funded, or whatever, however you're planning to fund this project, stated in there as well. And yeah, basically that's it. And from there, we're going to go to the references, and that's going to conclude your research proposal. To sum it all up, we have a title, we have an abstract, we have a little background/literature review that moves on into the research question. So you basically state, this is the current state of the art, we have a problem, that's the research gap, and that this then leads to basically what you want to do in this research. And then you move on to the methodology, where you're going to dive a bit more into the theory of how you want to solve this research problem. And now after that, you're going to do the methods, which is the practical steps, right? You're going to explain the methods. methods. And then very, very important, timeline and funding, especially the timeline. Make sure that it's well thought through and bulletproof against any kind of things that can go wrong in your research. And then you're going to end it with references. And that's how you write a research proposal. And with this, I want to end this video. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like, a comment, or a subscription. It means a lot for a small channel like this so that I can produce better video for you guys when the channel grows a bit more. If you haven't done so already, also make sure to check out my Instagram channel where I share daily bite-sized academic tips. You can just scan the QR code here to get to the Instagram channel. And other than that, I hope you have a beautiful day wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!